What I want to do today is briefly trace some of that history, because we are condemned to repeat it, and then to briefly talk about the most recent assaults on civil liberties, and finally, what are we going to do about it? Because I have promised myself and organizers and audiences that my goal today is not to simply scare you and send you away to hide out in your busy lives, but to join me in doing something about it. Thank you. And I'm even taking a moment to turn off my cell phone. The ink was barely dry on the Bill of Rights itself when in 1798 the Alien and Sedition Acts were passed during the John Adams administration. In the time and by the men predominantly who wrote the Bill of Rights, who wrote the First Amendment, they could pass and vigorously enforce laws, the Alien Act against foreigners, immigrants, outsiders, and the Sedition Act, punishing journalists, writers, for doing nothing more than criticizing the Adams administration due to the impending war with France. The Alien and Sedition Acts. Remember that ugly coupling of the attitude toward immigrants, outsiders, dissenters, dissidents, and the repression of free speech and free press. Deeply, deeply ingrained in our country, simultaneously with the great ideals that our country stands for. We come down to the Civil War, that great American President Abraham Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus. The writ of habeas corpus, the great writ borrowed from English law, which said that any time a person was being held illegally, beyond all appeals after they had been exhausted, such a person had a right to a writ of habeas corpus to be brought before a court and to challenge their incarceration and their detention. The writ of habeas corpus, written into the body, the text of the U.S. Constitution, even before we got the first 10 amendments, which are the Bill of Rights. Written into the clause having to do with the powers of Congress, not the executive branch. No power exists in the Constitution for a president to suspend the writ of habeas corpus. And yet, fearing for the nation, fearing for what today we would call national security, Abraham Lincoln repeatedly suspended the writ of habeas corpus, sending Southerners and Confederate sympathizers to jail with no charges, no lawyers, indefinitely. World War I, the Espionage and Sedition Acts, passed in the midst of that war. Dissidents, dissenters, anarchists, and others swept up in the ignoble Palmer raids, named after another Attorney General, Mitchell Palmer, as a young FBI agent, J. Edgar Hoover, organized sweeps and arrests of people across this country. Under the espionage, people of no lesser a stature than Eugene Debs, convicted and sentenced to 10 years in jail for giving a speech in Canton, Ohio, that was far less seditious than the speech I'm giving right now. And his case went to the United States Supreme Court. And in 1919, in a triumvirate of opinions, Schenck, Frowork, and Debs, under the court leadership of none other than Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr. Eugene Debs' conviction was upheld. The clear and present danger test was used. Anarchists, dissidents, and others were sent to jail for long prison terms, and many were deported. And then we come down, within the lifetime, I'm sure, of many people in this room, to World War II, and to one of the most shameful chapters in American history, when upwards of 120,000 Japanese Americans were torn from their homes and offices and sent to internment camps up and down this coast and elsewhere. No charges, no crimes, no lawyers, no trials, sent because of their heritage and their nationality. In one, next to slavery, of the grossest examples, in a phrase not then used, of racial profiling. 2/3 of the Japanese Americans interned were American citizens. Why do I tell you that? Not because American citizens are the only ones whose rights are protected under the Constitution, despite the efforts of John Ashcroft and many others. The United States Constitution protects persons, not just citizens. Anyone in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction of the United States is protected by the U.S. Constitution. Only in the area of voting does the word citizens even appear in the U.S. Constitution. Yet Ashcroft and others in the administration tried to reassure citizens of the United States that their rights were protected, that they had nothing to fear from the Patriot Act and all the rest. I tell you that 2/3 of them were citizens because it is an example of what Niemöller feared. When a government moves repressively against some, it will move against its own citizens. And it would take generations. It would take a commission appointed by President Ford to examine the internment of the Japanese, to authorize the payment of reparations to the survivors. And the commission concluded that 3 things contributed to the climate in which the internment occurred, and in which the military lied to the Justice Department, and the Justice Department lied to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court in the Korematsu case upheld the internment of the Japanese. And what the commission found, and listen to these words, listen to them now. The Commission on the Japanese Internment found it was due to racial prejudice, war hysteria, and a lack of political leadership. Racial prejudice, war hysteria, and a lack of political leadership. And we could come down with this litany down through the period of COINTELPRO and Nixon and J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI and the CIA and the infiltration of the anti-war movement and the infiltration of Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement, and come down to McCarthyism before that and Watergate after. We have had too many shameful chapters in American history. Shameful chapters when, because of fear, because of a crisis, foreign or domestic, real or imagined, we have lost our way. We have lost our way as far as that Declaration of Independence, that Constitution, and that Bill of Rights are concerned. And we have sweepingly violated the rights of citizens and non-citizens in this country.